welcome to Property Question Time. My name is Gemma Forte, and this is the show where you get to ask your property-related questions to a panel of industry experts. Let me introduce you to who we've got today. First up, we've got Claire Barker, who is the MD of Equilaw. Hello, Claire. And then we've got Neil Cobbold, the COO of PayProp. And last but not least, a regular on this show, we've got Nicole Bremner, who is the founder of East 8. So welcome all of you. We're going to get straight into some questions, and I'm going to start with you, Claire, because I think this one's literally been written for you.
Right.
So this person says, I've heard of this equity release as a way that I can access money from my house. So please can you tell me exactly what it is and how it works?
Yeah, sure. Equity release is a really popular thing for over 55s to do. It essentially involves them unlocking cash from their property. Usually in the form of a mortgage. There are home reversion plans available as well where you sell a share of the property, but they're very uncommon at the moment.
Okay.
So the majority of them are lifetime mortgages. The way that they work is that you take a secured loan against the property and you don't make any repayments usually unless you want to until you either die or go into long-term care.
Okay.
So they're really, really flexible from the point of view of being able to raise money in later life.
Okay, so most people at that point have got quite a bit of capital in their home.
Yeah.
So they think, well, instead of having X, I'll have just a bit less and go on a cruise.
Absolutely, they can do whatever they like with the money. So it gives them that freedom essentially to either repay debt, go on a cruise, give money to children, whatever it is.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you. Right, moving along now to Neil. This one is quite long. You ready? The washing machine in my rented flat broke 4 weeks ago. This was, I love the detail. This was caused by my flatmate's bra underwiring coming loose, we think. Wow, that's an old bra. You need to get yourself a new set, love. And the washing machine flooded the kitchen. It's when they're poking in. It's awful. You know it's time to get a new one. The manufacturer sent out an engineer to look who took photos and ordered a part. They've just got back to our landlord to say that it was due to customer abuse. And that's a bit strong, isn't it? And that they won't replace or fix the machine. My flatmate's bra, this is one of my favourite ones ever, was machine washable. Sometimes they are hand washed. We've been without a washing machine for over a month and have had to take our stuff to the laundrette repeatedly, which should be reimbursed by our landlord. Where do we stand legally? And actually, I'm joking, but this sounds really frustrating. The machine is less than a year old, and this fault was caused on a normal wash. Can our landlord refuse to replace the machine? We don't have a contract anymore. I've been here for 2.5 years, and he prefers to minimise paperwork.
Okay, well, there's a few things to answer on that one. Firstly, you always have a contract. He might not have given you, and it's become a statutory periodical, but there's always a contract in place, and he always has to bear with the bare minimum that has to be in with a contract for anybody who rents an accommodation.
So in this case, would it revert to the contract they originally had and be the same term?
The original contract, but the term, the assured short hold tenancy term, is no longer viable. That's the only thing that changed. It becomes a month-by-month periodic tenancy, but all the other terms of the contract remain in place.
So and it's like a rolling contract.
It's a rolling contract.
Yeah.
If he chooses not to give you another secured term, he cannot claim that the other parts of the contract are no longer enforced.
Okay.
Then it comes to if he gave you a property with an appliance in there, it is for the landlord to keep that maintained. He can't not fix it. What he can do is, if it is down and the manufacturer is claiming that it's abuse from the tenant, he can try and reclaim the money back from the tenant, but he cannot refute to replace the appliance.
So he could take it from the deposit later?
He could take it from the deposit later if it was no longer, but he would actually invoice it back to the tenant and get them to pay it. Now, the fact is that they can say it was caused by an underwire bra. If the manufacturer has sent an expert out who has taken photographs and he's saying it is down to misuse of the item, then the landlord does have a claim for actually getting that cost back. But that is separate to whether he fixes the item or not. It's the same. If you broke a fridge, I couldn't then say you can't keep chilled items in there until you pay me for it. I have to fix the item, provide you the facility that I gave you as part of the contract, and then deal with who is monetary liability as a separate item. They're two things that need to be divested.
Okay.
And the problem is that the landlord, and as human beings, we're quite often, we don't separate the emotional side. And because he's got the emotional, you broke my item, I paid this in there, the manufacturer says you did it, he's trying to hold them responsible for it. And what he needs to do is look at his own liabilities, what he has to do as a landlord, and then let's settle the he said, she said, whether it was a bra or not, after the fact, once everything's back as the tenancy should be.
Because my brain's whirring, like, how do you abuse a washing machine? I don't know. But it's interesting, isn't it, that the manufacturers come, so you'd think, yeah, they would have an idea. So something mysterious has gone on.
It might be an idea for the landlord to provide a £1 wash bag for the flatmate to put his or her bras in for the washing, and then the problem is solved. That's what they're there for.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you said that, actually, because I always think, and I have rented out a couple of flats myself, and I think it's a little bit of give and take, isn't there? A little bit of common sense. And actually, sometimes I would just, pay for something because I want to keep my tenants happy and they're regular payers and all of that kind of thing. So
there's also the point that although he has to provide you with an item, it doesn't state what that item needs to be. So if you push your landlord to the point, well, I'll get a second-hand washing machine that's all battered and no longer in line with it because I'm meeting my statutory duties if it's something that you're not going to look after. So sometimes that give and take conversation can take place, so it benefits actually you as a tenant. Just stepping yourself away from all responsibility might not do you the best in the long run.
In the meantime, they've had all this, laundrette fees and all the rest of it, and it is a pain not having a washing machine.
Absolutely.
Especially if you've got 2 kids.
But that's what I'm saying, they're different items.
Yes.
So first of all, get it fixed, let's stop it going on, and then the monetary discussion needs to be made with both parties coming at it from an open point, not always throwing blame at the other party.
Yeah, okay. And I guess because you guys all work in property on a sort of a large scale and on a business scale, little disputes like this probably seem sort of quite small and you'd probably settle them quite easily, but some people it just becomes huge, doesn't it?
So I've seen people fighting over rhubarb in the garden when they've sold houses.
No.
It's absolutely crazy.
Really?
Toilet roll holders, rrhubarb, anything goes.
Really?
Yeah.
What, they want to take the rhubarb
Yeah,
with them?
can they take the rhubarb? Can they not take the rhubarb?
Well, we once bought a flat, and because they were not listed on the fixtures and fittings, when we went in, every single socket for the plug sockets and every light switch had been taken from the property.
I personally find behaviour like that really mean.
Yes.
I just think, for goodness sake, like the effort of having to screw off the things and then leaving people like the wires coming out is just not honest. But yes, I've heard that about having to list every single thing, including sort of like light bulbs and stuff. Goodness me. Right, so I hope that's helped with that one. Okay, so Nicole, let's find your question. Here we are. I'm renting a house to a lovely lady who's been a brilliant tenant, funnily enough, just talking about this, and they really looked after the place. A while ago, she asked if it would be okay if her boyfriend moved in. I said yes, but I didn't say anything about the tenancy agreement. Now, she's due to get married soon, and I need to know where I stand, as I'm guessing she'll want to change her name. As she's been the best tenant I've ever had, I don't want any problems, but I do need to protect myself, and I'm guessing that I'll probably need to issue a new tenancy agreement in both their names. Is this correct? It's a periodic one. Any suggestions, please?
Sounds like you need to have a chat with her, because it seems that you need to discuss certain issues around whether she is changing her name. Lots of women don't change their names now when they get married. They choose to continue on with their maiden name. So first of all, the landlord needs to find that out. And then also, once they do get married, they don't need to amend the AST, because it also covers anyone who has a right of abode within that property. Actually, Neil is much more of an expert on this, and so he can add a little more information to this than I can.
Yeah, so once they're married, it comes under spousal responsibility that actually the tenancy covers. Unless it expressly says within the tenancy that it's for this person, for most people it's for them to use as a family home, and obviously our family members are included within that. What I would actually perhaps do is go and negotiate to put the person on, because actually if they really are a good tenant, then actually by renewing the tenancy, we take it out of the periodical, we give them another fixed term, they have another 12 months assured term of being in there. It actually gives them the long-term stability as they're getting married. There are going to be a lot of changes, that actually their home is secure, so you actually keep them as a tenant. Because once you find a good tenant, you want to keep them. And so the more you can be seen to be helping, the better.
That's the goodwill that you're adding to that.
By the same token, if they as a couple have plans to move, the sooner you know, the better.
Yes.
So I agree. I always think sometimes people get so nervous, don't they, about addressing things. But there's nothing better than a nice, honest conversation, get everything out and just find out. Because it's not going to change anything, is it? They either want to go or they want to stay.
And nobody minds a new contract. At the moment,
No,
the only reason
yeah.
things come up around for the contract is if people are trying to attract charges to the contract.
Right.
If actually you're doing it to benefit that individual, then nobody's going to mind that you're looking
Yeah.
out for them.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, good tenants are just worth their weight, aren't they?
Yeah.
Right, sometimes on this show we do golden nuggets, and I'm just throwing this at you, but has anybody got a pearl of wisdom? Anybody want to go first?
Well,
Oh, come on then, Neil.
not really a pearl of wisdom, but it's something for people to keep an eye on, certainly within property and how we're going to market and changes. So we've actually got a new regulation that is coming in, and everybody's looking at the property sector as to what will happen within England. But actually, Scotland's new regulation comes into force at the end of January.
Okay.
Now, and actually there's been a huge take-up with a new qualification, and we do like to see what they're doing north of the border. It's able to test within a small microcosm, but it's certainly, I've been speaking to a lot of people lately who are saying, well, this regulation, what does it mean for me? We don't know, there's so much uncertainty. But actually there are things out there we can look at. What is being done, what is being looked at, what's being done there, and actually it can give us some guidance as to what may happen within the UK. It doesn't all have to be doom and gloom, and let's bury our head in the sand.
Yeah.
Let's look at the positive that's actually happened. A new qualification that's been introduced for Scotland, it's having a huge amount of take-up now, where they're raising the standards of people working within the industry,
Right,
which can
okay.
only be the better.
Yeah.
And the idea that this gets attracted down here to both agents and to landlords, that everybody dealing within property has this minimum standard level, will be great, and it shouldn't be something that we're worried about.
No, that sounds like a positive to me. And I love the fact that in Scotland, once you put an offer in, that's serious, isn't it? And it's kind of the deal is done. I wish we did that.
Well,
in
there
England.
have been talks about us actually bringing that on.
Yeah.
And stopping the gazumping rule that you can actually go forward and take another. But actually, people look at it from that side of the board, from the gazumping being from the consumer, but they don't talk about the person who had the offer and it went through as the vendor, who actually didn't look to be gazumped, but the person went because they got a better property that they were
Yeah.
able to go through on multiple offers. So I think everybody could benefit on this of it being more stable.
I agree. I think it's such a nail-biting time buying a home, and if anybody's experienced that feeling of losing something that you thought was yours because they've just changed their mind, it's horrible because your offer's so serious, or it should be. Shouldn't
It's
it?
about a 50% drop-off at
Is that as
conveyancing
high
now.
as
Yeah,
that?
at the moment it is. Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
high.
And it's fine for your professional buyers because for them it's just an asset. But for somebody going and buying it and for a home, and for a lot of instances they've looked at schools, they've looked
That's
at
right.
things
It's
around
very
the
Look at
area.
30 houses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've imagined putting their furniture in and the Christmas tree and all those things, and it's a really emotional purchase. I think when people buy a house, they're not necessarily looking at it as an asset for
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, there we go. I think we should look north to the border and take up these Scottish, very sensible ways. Thank you. That's really interesting. That is it for this part of Property Question Time, but join us after this short break for more. Welcome back to Property Question Time with me, Gemma Forte, and my three guests. We've got Claire Barker, we've got Neil Cobbold, and Nicole Bremner. Right, straight back into the nitty gritty, I believe. In fact, let's get another golden nugget. Claire, have you got one for me?
Yeah, I'm thinking that equity release is a huge market at the moment, and what most people don't realise is that you can actually use equity release to buy property as well as just mortgage on your existing house. So if you picture the scene where you might have people who are living in a city centre, it's really busy, the stairs are steep, they've got a really long narrow garden and it's not particularly user friendly. They actually want to upsize, they want to move by the sea and have a nice bungalow or an apartment, but it's potentially prohibitively expensive for them to do that. So what they can do is get a mortgage out on the one that they're buying in the same way that you do with normal conveyancing, and have that in place secured, so that you do the sale and purchase in the same way. The equity release can be dovetailed in, and they can live there without making any payments until they die or move into long-term care.
Ah, okay. So is there like an age limit with equity release? Like, do you have to be a certain age?
You have to be a minimum of 55.
55 minimum,
For
okay.
most, and sometimes it's 60 for some of the lenders as well.
Okay, yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. That I think it's so you say it's quite a new thing? Is it just becoming more and more prevalent as we're like more of an ageing society, becoming
Absolutely.
more necessary?
It's not new. It's actually been going since around about the 1960s.
Right, okay.
But historically, the reputation wasn't great. It's now really heavily regulated, and we've got a very strong trade body in the Equity Release Council who are sort of keeping an eye on standards. The FCA obviously regulates it very heavily. So with an ageing demographic, very little pension provision, there's really very little other way of raising money for a lot of people if they don't necessarily want to downsize.
Yeah, and people becoming a bit more savvy, I think, maybe at looking at different options. And
I think as well that the 60 to 70-year-old people are much more used to having credit. The older segment are less happy with the idea of incurring a debt on the house, but probably the 60, 70, 75-year-olds, they're very used to having credit cards and mortgages in the past. And they're less potentially bothered about leaving inheritances for their children as well.
Determined not to.
Much to their children's annoyance, I have to say, but nevertheless.
It's all changing, isn't it? Thank you, Claire. That's great. Okay, so Neil, a question for you, please. My son signed a 12-month lease in 2016, which ended in June 2017. His rent's payable monthly on the 25th of each month. He's completed on a house purchase, so gave a month's notice in October. We've studied the tenancy papers. There's no mention anywhere in it about giving notice after the initial 12 months. The landlord's insisting that the notice can only be accepted from the 25th of the month and that rent is payable until the 25th of November. How should he respond to this?
Well, unfortunately, the landlord is correct.
Right,
so
okay.
You wouldn't have it within the assured short-hold tenancy. And as I say, once it comes out and the term goes, it becomes a statutory periodical. And in there, the notice must finish on either the first or last day of the rental period.
Right.
So if they pay monthly,
yeah,
then it's actually not the 25th, because if he pays on the 25th, then the period is 25th to the 24th. So
right.
Officially, he can move out on the 24th, and that can be his last day of payment. But if he gave it within October, it still falls into his next rental period that 30-day falls. So the landlord is absolutely right.
Okay.
What they shouldn't be doing is looking at the tenancy. If they actually look up statutory periodic rules, it will tell you that based on how you pay, the two variations are if you are weekly or monthly payers determining when the notice period stands and for how long.
So basically it's 3 weeks of rent for nothing.
That they are going to have to pay.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to suck it up in life, haven't you?
Unfortunately.
And the thing is, I guess these are the kind of things that if you really looked into it before, you'd have worked it out. So yeah.
Well, unfortunately, it's one of the things that people aren't given enough advice on. That actually, once a tenancy ends and it's not renewed, within the industry we know it becomes a statutory periodical. And if you go to Citizens Advice or Homeless, they'll tell you what that actually means. But other than that, naturally, we go back to the initial contract, and there's nothing in there. It states in there 1 calendar month as his notice period during the assured term. So he's rolled that on without realising that naturally he's become subject to different laws to what were initially signed into.
I see, okay. The plot thickens. So
Yeah.
that's why now that they've scanned the agreement, they're like, well, it's not there.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that, guys, but there you go. You wanted an answer, and that is it. I'm afraid it's not good news. You're going to have to pay those weeks of rent. Right, Nicole, one for you. This person says, having bought a one-bed in London 3 years ago with a £25,000 deposit, I've now got about 100 grand of equity, maybe a tad more. I love the word tad. I don't like the block and I'm moving out. My fiance's got her own place. We're married in the spring, so we're moving in together. Congratulations. I can rent it, but other income and tax clampdown means I don't make any net profit. So I could sell, but I don't know where to invest the 100 grand plus equity. Ideas, please.
Wow, that's quite a growth in that apartment
is, I
over
know.
a
It's
short
just
period of
what's
time. That's
happened.
brilliant. Yeah, very well invested to make 75,000 over such a short period of time. So that's brilliant. The first thing they need to do is talk to their accountant about whether the new changes to taxation on landlords is applicable to them, because generally it is only the higher tax payers. It may not impact them. So he needs to talk to his accountant or his financial advisor and see how he is going to be impacted. and perhaps that will then determine whether they keep the flat or whether they do sell that particular flat. If he is looking to sell and realise that equity, then there are a whole range of options that he has to invest that additional 100,000. It could be another property that is perhaps that has more of an income or a yield rather than capital gain, and he might not be so penalised by the taxation on that. He could look to diversify his portfolio as well and look at other asset classes and not just property. It sounds like he's already quite heavily weighted in the property anyway. Or he could look at other investment opportunities such as crowdfunding, whether that be equity crowdfunding or debt crowdfunding. There's quite a few options out there now. There's also fixed rate deposits. There's so many different options that he has for investing that 100,000. It's all about sitting down with someone who is trusted and working out a strategy that works for his individual circumstances and for theirs now that they're a couple and getting married.
I mean, there's some parts of the UK where you can buy a property for 100 grand, can't you, outright?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You could buy 2 even.
I'd also say to have a look at it. If you'd have turned around years ago and put it in and said you're going to make no profit out of this property for the next 3 years, but you're going to end up with 100 grand at the end of it, he would have still made the investment. So his property now, the fact that he's not going to make a net profit, if there's a potential for that investment to continue to grow, it doesn't necessarily mean that he should have his eyes on the equity.
Yeah, and that's tax-free, given that he's lived in it for those 3 years. That is tax-free.
Yeah.
So there's other taxation implications for him over time as well as he now moves out. So yeah, it could be very interesting.
It's amazing. We've done well anyway. Right, Claire, finally for you. Someone says, if I take an equity release, does that mean my children will lose their inheritance?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
It could do. I think the difficulty is that you've got to weigh up the gamble of taking out a debt over the property against what house price inflation will do and how long the debt runs. So it could be that they take a loan and it may only be a small debt of £10,000, roughly expect it to double over 10 years on sort of compound interest rates. If house price inflation strips that debt rolling up, then probably not. Yeah. Also, there are products on the market which allow you to ring fence certain parts of the equity if leaving an inheritance is really important. So you've got to decide and get advice from a financial advisor, I think, what's really important. Do you want to leave an absolute amount for your children, or are you kind of thinking if there's some left over, brilliant. Otherwise, potentially think about...
Sort yourselves out.
Sort yourselves out, to stand on your own 2 feet, quite common. But potentially as well, they could release the money and give the children what tends to be called a living inheritance, so that they can actually get them out the house onto their own housing ladder as well, and perhaps gift a deposit. So there's lots of options, but best to get financial advice.
Okay, excellent stuff. Thank you very much. Right, we got one more golden nugget, I do believe. Looking at you, Nicole.
Sure. In the first part, we're talking about tenancy a lot and about how to create goodwill around being a landlord. And I think there's a very small thing that every single landlord can do that goes a very long way, and that is it's the simple things. When your tenants are first moving in, leave them a care package. Some loo roll, some washing up detergent, some washing up liquid for the washing machine, some milk, biscuits, bread, just sugar, just some simple things in a little care package. Which would mean
so much.
Exactly, it goes so far, and it will cost you £50 to just leave that with a bottle of wine to say thank you. And again, at Christmas or if just leave them a bottle of wine just to say thank you for being a tenant. And these sorts of things create so much goodwill with your tenants, and really don't take very much at all to do.
I think that's absolutely brilliant advice, actually. I've never been like a big landlord, obviously, but I did have a flat at one point, and I'd moved in with my ex-husband, and I was a really nice landlady. And like, they phoned once and sort of said, look, this new tenant I had, he was about 6'6", and he just said, look, the bed's just a bit small, you know. And I just went out and got him a bigger bed, and then they were there for 3 years. They were so nice. They paid her. I was a bit like, but you know, you just be like, try to be nice to people.
That's right.
Good
It's
advice.
cheaper than a void period anyway. Of
Yeah.
it being empty. Yeah.
And actually, you said £50, but I could do a care package probably for 10 and get a Lamborghini or something. And they'd be like, oh, I've got a really bad headache, thanks a lot. I mean, that's really nice wine, I think. But that is so nice. And I've also had the opposite experience of a landlady who just made everything very difficult and just was always never contactable and all of that. So yeah, that's great advice. There you go. The little things will be much appreciated. Well, thank you so much for all of your golden nuggets and wisdom. Thank you. That's it for this episode of Property Question Time. But if you would like to get some questions into us, please do. info@property-tv.co.uk is the email address. Or, of course, you can go to our website. In the meantime, let me just thank my guests, Claire Barker, Neil Cobbold and Nicole Bremner. Thank you so much.